Okay. So far only one. It looks like you heard the stern. You heard the stern of the evening. Right.
Maybe.
Oh.
Probably won't come.
No.
No, probably do what?
Where's David? David.
No,
That's okay. Okay, I'll spend a few people.
The bride was Charlotte. I thought tomorrow night.
Oh, is there going to be challenge tomorrow night?
I think you're trying to bride.
Oh, yeah. Yehuda's making.
Is he making?
You're
Bring
gonna
an ice cream machine. Bring an ice cream machine.
What's tomorrow night? I see him.
Yeah, finishing the perk.
You carry it.
I'll be missing you. Okay.
You got a couple of people downstairs.
And hold on with those on Zoom.
No, on Zoom.
Okay.
Let's get more people.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a bit of a whether the people who want to learn privately have the right to do it.
Yeah.
Because we're less. No, we're becoming less.
Okay, that's not good. We have to
There
just.
are people who aren't learning here.
They're still on Zoom. Getting half black.
Do a rallying cry. Rallying, yeah.
The guys on Zoom don't care.
No, we had
Guys in queue with
when
the
we
base
first
Zoom
said we
there.
had 12, 15 minutes there.
Yeah. Okay. I'll have to get chizuk. Is it on by the way, Chaim? Is it the fact that it's closed doesn't make effect? Okay, we're up to Daf Kuf Lamed Hey Amud Aleph, 4 lines from the bottom, regarding Bris Milah on Shabbos. Omar Basi, Kol she'imo yitmei leida nimo lishmoina, v'chol she'imo yitmei leida ein nimo lishmoina. When a woman gives birth, whether she sees blood or not, she becomes tummy. The Torah tells us all the details of the tumah for a boy and for a girl. There are two situations where a woman can give birth and be Jewish and not become a tummy. One is if she's a Yotze Doifen. If a baby is born through a C-section, then the halacha is the mother is not tummy laden.
Sorry, the Gemara, I think it's New Roman.
Yeah.
That says that why we're allowed to do Bris Milah on Shabbos. It could be done on the 9th day, done on the 10th day. Why was Shabbos doicha because of Bris Milah? And Maisa, according to the man that obviously is allowed to go on Shabbos, because we Chavivas mitzvah shaita. The love of the mitzvah in the right.
The Gemara earlier said because dashen b'yoyim, we dashen b'yoyim afilu b'yoyim Shabbos. That's what we dashen earlier.
The
Okay.
question is on the stand where mitzvah can be done later.
Yeah.
And then there's probably where you can't do Shabbos in such a mitzvah.
Right.
Otherwise, it's coming from outside.
Yeah. So there's two situations the woman is not tummy laden. Either it's a doifen, it's a C-section, or more complicated case, a woman gave birth when she wasn't Jewish, then she became a Giyovas and with the baby. So therefore what happens is like this. The Tumas Leda only exists for a Jewish lady. A non-Jewish lady does not have Tumas Leda. So therefore, it says like this. If she doesn't have Tumas Leda, then the Bris Milah does not take place on the 8th day. He makes a connection between the Tumas Leda and the Bris being even on Shabbos. That means for many, I remember once we had the Bris on Shabbos, and the first thing the Moel asks, was it born a normal way or was it born through a C-section? It's born through a C-section, it's not no Chilul Shabbos because there's no Tumas Leda. Often the woman will bleed anyway, and she will be tummy. But regarding that, if she doesn't bleed, she's not tummy.
But she's not.
So no too much
It's
nothing.
Thomas Neda.
Yeah, then it's
No,
Tumas Leda.
no.
C-section.
Yeah. If she does bleed,
she
it's not
doesn't
Tumas
bleed,
Leda, it's not Tumas Leda. Shnema, what's his right to this? Because the pasuk says Ishok, he says Tuma. The pasuk starts off by telling us the halachos of Tuma, and then it says so that only when there's Tumas Leda, then there's the din of Bris Milah on the 8th day. The earlier generations before from Avam to Matan Torah, where Avam was commanded on the mitzvah of Milah, the Tumah was not kept. And if that's the case, they had Milah on Shabbos, there was no Tumas Leda, and yet the Bris Milah was done on the 8th day. Omar Loi, so replied to him, Nitno Teva Kafok Lamed Hey on the base, V'nischad Sho Halacha, and the Halacha changed, became new. Meaning like this. Before Matan Torah, indeed, it had nothing to do with Tumas Leda. But once the Torah was given, the halacha that Bris Milah can be done on the 8th day is only from the din of only if it's tumas later. That's what the Gemara says. Okay. So Ma'ani, is that so? We've learned a baby born through a C-section he's got two ollars. Rashi gives two explanations how it's possible to have two ollars. Either he literally has two male organs, or he has one male organ, but it's covered twice. The Be'eri is very bothered with Rashi's pshat that it's covered twice, because he says even if it's covered twice, it's not two ollars, it's one ollar, it's just a very thick ollar, double ollar. So he says it's only talking about a boy who actually has two male organs. Anyway, halacha is a yotzei for mishesh to shtei ollars. Rav Huna v'Rav Chia bar Rav Chadama mechalel on Shabbos, Chadama ein mechalel. One says you're allowed to on Shabbos, one says no. Ad kan you pligel lechalel on Shabbos? No machlokas is whether mechalel Shabbos or not. Aval shmoina vadim alin on it. But everybody agrees you have to do it on the 8th day. Not like Rabasi who said that if it's no tumas later, you don't have to do the 8th day. And it's more about Talia. It's exactly the same machlokas, and that's exactly the same question. So that means the question whether the Bismillah has to be done on the 8th day is the question of whether Bismillah is doing Shabbos. If Bismillah has to be done on the 8th day, then it's a Chilul Shabbos. We'll do it on Shabbos. If it's not done on the 8th day, you don't need to. We don't do it on Shabbos. So that is what the Gemara says over here. Right. That means like this. According to this stage of the Gemara, a baby born through a C-section, which day would you Bismillah? Not on the 8th day. When would you do it? You do it even on the 1st day. You could do it straight away. You do it on the 1st day. Says the Gemara, Kitanoi. We've got Machlokes Tanoim regarding this question. The Torah says like this: by Nakshvoch told Avram Avinu Bismillah, he told him about doing Bismillah for the servants, and he said to him like this: "Kol when Shvunas Yomim 8 days old, Yimoy lochem kol zocha yelid bayis umiknas keser." There are two kinds of servants you can have: a yelid bayis and a miknas keser. What's the difference between yelid bayis and miknas keser? If we get the clarity over here at the Akdama, and what happens is the rest of the Gemara go very, very easily. Yelid bayis is a servant born, yelid bayis, born at home, meaning you own the mother, and once you own the mother, the baby that is born is yours. That's called yelid bayis. Miknas kesef is literally one which you bought with money. So there's two kinds of servants you can have: a yelid bayis, one which you born in the house, and miknas kesef, one which you bought. And by both of them it says, "Uben shmunas yomim yimolachem ishtu v'smil on the 8th day by yelid bayis miknas kesef." But then the problem is that the next pasuk repeats itself, and it says like this. If you've got the side of the Gemara, sometimes some Gemaras have it. It's very nice. It's voracious. The next pasuk says, "Himol yimol yelid beis chamiknas kaspecha," and the pasuk doesn't say the 8th day. It just says that just do bismillah. So again, we've got one pasuk that says yelid beis miknas kesef is done bismillah on the 8th day. One pasuk says you have to do bismillah, but it doesn't say 8th day. From here, the Gemara understands from these two psukim that there are 4 halachas. There's a yelid bayis that you do it on the 8th day. There's a yelid bayis that you don't do it on the 8th day. There's a miknas kesef you do it on the 8th day, and there's a miknas kesef that you don't do it on the 8th day. Yelid bayis is a baby born from a shivcha that you own. Miknas kesef is a baby that you buy. And in both cases, you have a din that sometimes you do it on the 8th day, and sometimes you don't do it on the 8th day. Now, what does it depend on? The Mefarshim explain it depends. The closer it is to a Jewish birth, the more likely you're making it that the bris should be on the 8th day. The less it is connected to a Yiddish birth, the less likely it is to make it a bris on the 8th day. So we have 4 cases we have to work out. Yelid bayis on the first day, yelid bayis on the 8th day, miknas kesef on the 8th day, and miknas kesef on the 8th day. So Moses says ketanot. The bayis goes as follows: Yesh yelid bayis shnimo lechod, v'yesh yelid bayis shnimo lishmoina. Yesh miknas kesef shnimo lechod, v'yesh miknas kesef shnimo lishmoina. The Brisa sets out that there are 4 cases: a yelid bayis by 1, a yelid bayis by 8, miknas kesef by 1, miknas kesef by 8. Yesh miknas kesef shnimo lechod, yesh miknas kesef shnimo lishmoina. When is that? Ketzah. A person buys a woman who's got already expecting a child. Think about it. You buy the mother when she's still expecting. So the baby, when it was born, whenever you buy an amor, the first thing you have to do is toivel her l'shem shivcha kananis. And shivcha kananis is mechuyev in some of the mitzvahs. So the minute you buy her, you toivel her, and then she becomes partly Jewish. By the time she gave birth, she was already semi-Jewish, and therefore the birth is considered compared to Yiddish birth, and therefore the bris is on the 8th day. But lokach shivcha v'vlado imo. If you buy a shivcha when she's already given birth, let's say shivcha kanan is a woman, a Goyish woman gave birth, and a day later you buy her. So you're buying her with the baby. Immediately you do bris milah. Why? Because that's not like a Yiddish birth, because you bought the baby when it was already born. That means the birth was done while it wasn't Jewish. But you took a shivcha, and she was expecting by you, she came expecting by you, that's the nimul lishmoina. Well, Chama, that's a Tana, he argues, and he says like this: Yoldo v'achkach it tvila. If she gave birth and then you did tvila, so you did b'ayish nimul echad. It's tvila v'achkach yoldo, so you did b'ayish nimul lishmoina. It depends when the tvila happened. Did the tvila happen before the birth or after the birth? If the tvila happened before the birth, then the baby is doing bris milah on the 8th day. If the tvila happened after the birth, you do the milah on the 1st day. Why? Because he holds, like we said in the Amud Aleph from Rav Asi, that it all depends if there's tumas later. So therefore, if the tvila only occurred the day after the baby was born, there was no tumas later. Tumas later only exists if while the birth was happening, the woman was Jewish, but here she wasn't. So therefore, since she wasn't Jewish at the time of the birth, it's not considered yidit bais. The machlokes from the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Chama is exactly this question of Avasi. Tanna Kama holds we don't care as to whether the mother became tumas later or not. Either way, the baby is nimul lishmoina. But Chama says only if there's tumas later is nimul lishmoina. If there's no tumas later, it's not nimul lishmoina. So again, if a person has a shivcha and he only tovels her the day after she gives birth, so there will be machlokes Tanna Kama and Rabbi Chama, do you do bris milah immediately or do you do bris milah on the 8th day? Says the Gemara, some people agree. Who says that it depends when the tvila happens. He goes through now the whole cheshbon again, which we just said, but this time working how it works to Rav Chama and according to the Tanna Kama. According to Rav Chama, it works. According to the Tanna Kama, we'll see it gets more complicated. Why? You can have a baby born at home, which is nimul echad. You have a nimul lishmoina. Because that's gets nimul echad. Because that's nimul lishmoina. How? If a person bought a shivcha, but he never got around to toveling her, and then what happened was she gave birth, and then afterwards she toveled. Then it's only bris milah on the 1st day. Why? Because by the time when she did tvila was after birth. So during birth she never came to us later. It's tvila v'achach yoda. If she first did tvila, then she gave birth. Zodi did b'ayish nimul lishmoina. Mikdas kesef nimul lishmoina. Can she look at shivcha mu'beres? And you buy a woman which is expecting the tvila v'achach yoda. You tovel and afterwards she gave birth. So then the halacha is that you give the nimul lishmoina because you toveled and then really afterwards she gave birth. Mikdas kesef nimul le'echad. One person bought the mother, one person bought the child. Since one person bought the mother, one person bought the child, so the child is not considered like a Yiddish birth. In a Yiddish birth, the father is connected to the child before birth. Here, there was no connection through the mother. The father has a relationship with the mother and has a child. Here, the mother did not belong to him at all. He only bought the baby. Since he only bought the baby, it's not considered like a normal Yiddish birth, and therefore not do bris milah, only le'echad. And in the Tanna Kama, according to the Tanna Kama, all the other cases work. What does yilid bais mean? What does yilid bais? Let's look at it. Yilid bais. What's yilid bais mean? A baby born to a shivcha that I own. If I own her, so then I should be chayav yilid bais, do bris milah on the 8th day. Now, according to Rabbi Chama, he answered because she never did tvila. Since she never did tvila, so therefore there was no tumas later, so for the bris milah is on the 1st day. But according to the Tanna Kama holds it makes no difference if it's tumas later. As long as you own the mother, the baby does bris milah on the 8th day. When will you have a yilid bayis that the bris milah is only done on the 1st and not on the 8th day? It can never happen. A yilid bayis is always going to be bris milah on the 8th. When is going to be bris milah on the 1st? Says the Gemara, where you buy the shuvcha just for the baby. Meaning like this. you can buy somebody and have certain rights. That you can buy an evet, and that all you can do with him is a certain limited amount of work. Here we're talking about a situation where you bought the shivcha for the whole purpose is the only ownership you have of her is that the babies belong to you. You can't make her work. Since you don't have a real ownership in the mother, you've only got what's called a kinyan peiros, a kinyan of what's produced from the mother. So therefore you don't own the mother. Since you don't own the mother, so therefore the birth is considered to be like not a normal Jewish birth because you have no connection to the mother. So therefore in such a case, even the Tanei Kama agrees that your advice will be, the bris milah will be on the first day, not the 8th day. Yeah, that's the key, yes. They do bris milah on the first day. They do bris milah on the first day. So the Gemara says that according to a b'chama, you can have bris milah on the first day if the mother never toveled. According to the Tanei Kama, it's when the mother, even if the mother never toveled, you do the bris milah on the 8th day. We talk about when you only buy the mother for the children. Says the Gemara, there's a very big shaila in kinyan peiros. If you own a tree, and the only purpose that you own the tree is not that you can cut it down, but only for the fruit of it, is it considered like the tree belongs to you, or is it not like the tree belongs to you? Now, there's the gabe bikurim and other questions. The question is, if you hold that kinyan peiros is like a kinyan aguf, it's like owning the mother. Well, if you own the mother, so then it comes back to the question that the baby should therefore be considered to be like a normal birth, and he should be do bris milah on the 8th day. When you buy a shivcha on condition that you're never going to tovel, since you made a condition that you're never going to tovel, so therefore that's considered like a woman who's never going to be chayav mitzvahs, and therefore the halacha is that the baby which is born, the bris milah will be done on the first day. So that is the end of this particular sugya. Let's just summarize. So Asi came along and told us a chiddush that when is the din that you could do bris milah on Shabbos on the 8th day is only referring to a case where the mother is tumas later. When is she not tumas later? Either it's a yotze doif and it's a C-section, or that the mother wasn't Jewish at the time of the birth, she only became Jewish later. The Gemara establishes that this is actually a machlokes tanoi. Actually, I missed that one stage. The Gemara first establishes that this shaila, whether you mechal Shabbos, is dependent on the shaila, or do you have to do bris milah on the 8th day? And according to Ravasi, you don't need to do bris milah on the 8th day, you do bris milah on a different day. And the Gemara says this is machlokes tanoim, can you do bris milah on Shabbos as well? The Gemara explains it from the pasuk. The pasuk says, "Yilid bayis miknas kesef." That you've got yilid bayis miknas kesef. There are two kinds of shivchas you can have. One is where two kinds of avodim kananim that you can have. One which is born by you, and one which you acquire. And by both of them, there's one pasuk that says the bris is done on the 8th day, and one pasuk says the bris is done on the first day. And we explained, according to the man the Omar, that you have to have tumas later, so it's very straightforward. When is the bris done on the first day when there was no tumas later? When it was on the 8th day when there is tumas later? According to the man the Omar, that even when there's no tumas later, the bris is done on the 8th day. When is it shaykh? The maskana of the Gemara is where you buy the mother on condition with the decision that you're never going to tovel her. Since you're never going to tovel her, so therefore it's considered as if she's not a proper shivcha kananis, and therefore the bris is done on the first day, not on the 8th day. Says the Gemara like this, a new topic. Tanya Mishum Leloima, 5 lines from the bottom on Kuflamat Hemod base. Tanya Mishum Leloima, Kol Shashor Shleish Yom Be'adam Ein Nefa. If a baby is 30 days old, you can be guaranteed, you can be sure that it's not a nefa. That means it's not a stillborn. Shenema B'tir B'lechodesh Tifta. Shvina Asami B'Behema Ein Nefa. Shenema Mimashvini B'Hola Yotze L'Korban L'Grim. That means the fact of the Torah says that you only do pidyon aben when the baby is 30 days old. Why don't you do pidyon aben when the baby is 20 days old? The answer is because you don't know if the baby is a viable baby. Only once the baby is 30 days old, then you know that the babies are really going to survive. Less than that, you don't know. The afkivin would be numerous. For example, if a baby is nifta. What? Oh, you ask Sikasha, very good. How can you do bris milah? Maybe the baby is not alive, not going to be alive, viable. How can you do it? But nafkimina would be the gabi abelus. Does one chas v'shalom aleichem have to sit shiva for a baby died less than 30 days? According to Shmuel, not. Why? Because it's not considered till after 30 days. We don't know it's a sophic life or not. Again, The fact that the Torah says you don't do Pidyon Ben from days 30, he understands us till day 30, you don't yet know whether this baby is going to live or not. The same thing regarding an animal till 8 days. The Torah says you can't bring a korban until it's 8 days old. Why not? Because till it's 8 days old, it could be a dead animal. And since it's a dead animal, you can't bring it as a korban. Only once it's 8 days old, then you know that it's not. That's what Shimon Gamliel says. Nafka with more big other nafkimin like we just said. But that means until 30 days old by a human being and 8 days old by an animal, you do not know that it's alive. Although shot, if you don't wait that month, sveik have it a suffix. Says the Gemara, topic of Lamed Vavam on the Aleph, short question, Mim Alechem Amalin on it. How can you do Bismillah? Either way you can do Bismillah. If it's going to live, then Shafi Kamoil. If it's a viable child, then of course you do Bismillah. Like the Rishonim say, do some example. If you cut a piece of raw meat on Shabbos, are we done in Avera? No. Oh, blood is coming out. The answer is it's dead already. There's nothing, you're not doing anything. Similarly over here, the baby man only considered alive, fine. So you're just cutting a non-live, not viable baby, it's okay. Says the Gemara, but all the time, we had the price earlier. So, why is it not muktzah? Can you not? Can you not? It's not, yes. Maybe, no, I hear, okay. I mean, because it's something that I would say more than that. I just say one thing. I hear.
Not coming in 8 days. It's going to die anyway, so what does it matter?
But you can't bring Takadosh Baruch Hu come which is dead. It's an avela.
It's not dead. Right now it's alive. It might die.
Oh, see, you're touching a very good point, and that is that Shimon Gamliel understands not that it might die, it might not be a viable life, it might not have a real life, it might be dead already. The fact that you could see it moving and walking is just spasms, but it's not real life.
It's alive and well. It's walking.
It's not classed, it's not classed as an animal.
I know, that's different. You've just considered bird. You don't want to have a normal bird.
You as well.
That means we're not sure if there's any life in it.
It's living now.
Yes, a treifa. If a person kills a treifa, he's not chai bisa. Why? Because it's not considered alive. Oh, Tesis points out, the bottom Tesis from Helmut Bates, that there's a difference between 30 and 8. That regarding the 30, you have to wait till the 30th. That means till 31st. Regarding 8 days, it's just beginning of the 8th day. If you ever have a shaila when to do Pidyon Ben, it's the day 31, it's not day 30. That's how you do it. Okay. Oh, Kanim available for. Says the Gemara, Valhoda Tanya, Sofi bin Zayin, Sofi bin Ches, in Mechalanom Shabbos. They're not allowed to Mechal Shabbos do Bismillah on the baby, which is maybe 7, maybe 8. Let him do Bismillah either way. Why can't you do Bismillah on the Suffolk Nefel, Suffolk 7 months, Suffolk 8 months? Do Bismillah Monashach, either is alive or not. So the Gemara said, even if he's alive, you do Bismillah, if it's a proper life, and if it's not, it doesn't matter either way because it's like a dead body. Of course you can do Bismillah. Rabbi Lezer said you're allowed to do machshirei milah. What's machshirei milah? You're allowed to prepare the knife, you're allowed to do other things. Now regarding those things, you don't have the Monashah. Regarding the actual act of the milah, you have the Monashah. Because either way, you've done this, it's okay. Either you do Bismillah or you're just cutting a dead piece of meat. But regarding preparing the knife, let's say carrying the knife from the Shusarabim, if the baby is not truly alive, you're carrying it for no reason. So therefore, regarding the preparation for the Bismillah, you can't do. But the actual Bismillah itself is okay. Omar Abai, Ketanoi. This question is Machlekes Tanoi. The Pasuk says, V'chiyomus min ha'behima ashilochem lo'ochla. The Pasuk there is telling us that one is not allowed to eat an avela, and an avela is tummy. Now the Pasuk says like this, if an animal dies, let's just establish very quickly this. If an animal dies by itself without shechita, it's considered an avela. So if you come across, you're walking in the Lake District of some holidays, you see a cow drop down dead, and you touch it, you become tummy. You have to go to mikveh. Can't eat tomorrow. If you shecht it and you find that it's got something really wrong with it, let's say it's got a hole in the lungs, what's the din? It's not tummy, it's treifa. It's not the veda, it's treifa, right? Both of them are forbidden to eat. I remember that's a very hard to remember. Both the Vela and Shreifa, it's allowed to eat them. The only difference is touching regarding Tumah. That's the only difference. Now the pasuk over here is referring to an animal that dies, which is in the Vela. And the pasuk uses the extra word, an animal which you could eat. And why does the pasuk say an animal which you can eat? Just say, a behemoth animals you're allowed to eat. Just say, why do you have to add ashir lochem la'ochlo? That means only something you're allowed to eat is not tummy. But a ben shmoinam, in those days we said before, an animal that's a baby which is born after 8 months cannot survive. We said in Shtanu Ativ, the Shmuel says that nowadays the constitution of human beings and animals has changed. But in those days, an animal born after 8 months, a human being born after 8 months won't survive. So let's say a cow gives birth after 8 months, and you quickly shecht it. So you say to yourself, it won't be tummy, because what is it? A treifa. No. You couldn't have eaten it. So therefore, it is a nevela, not a treifa. That's the chiddush of the pasuk.
I don't know. Can we say it like that? Because even if it's a treifa,
Yes.
then it won't be an avela. Let's say you know it's got a hole in its lungs, or you know it's got a
Oh,
problem.
but that is because it was alive and then got shechted. And Ben Shemoina is considered not alive. You come back to this.
The condition is Royal Akila. So if it's
Right.
in 8 months, then you shecht it, it doesn't become a...
It becomes an avela.
It's still an avela.
It's an avela. That's what Mo says.
But I'm saying, but if something it's not already treifa,
Yeah.
you see it's a hole in line, it's not Royal Akila. But if you shecht it, it doesn't become a treifa.
No, then it's not Tommy. It's not Tommy.
Exactly.
Right.
Before you said the way to decide whether it's royal for achila. Here it's not royal for achila, but still it doesn't become a certain state.
I mean, you're asking why does the pasuk not include Ashilachem la'ochlo, that shreifa which has been shechted should also be forbidden to eat? How would you? Well, I'm not sure what you're asking.
You saying the condition is if it's royal achila from the pasuk, of course. But
That's the drasha. That is the drasha. Ashilachem
then
la'ochlo.
you're gonna get, then you can't say that.
Because maybe that's something the Gemara actually tackles very close to it. We'll see. The Gemara says that by treifa there's a possibility of eating. Here there's no possibility of eating. That's the difference.
You know there's already a
The Gemara asks that. The Gemara asks. So the Gemara says like this: Then he says no. That if you shecht an animal which is born after 8 months, which can't survive, the shechita is metar. That's the machlokas. Whether a baby which is born after 8 months is viable or not, and therefore whether if it's alive, therefore you shecht it, it's only considered a treifa. And the other man says no, it's considered a vela. If you say that according to man after 8 months, it's considered alive. So then why talk about whether it's metame or toy? Talk about whether you're allowed to eat it, because if it's actually a true life animal, then shechting it would make it permitted to be eaten. And the kulam meisu. Every degree is shum gamil it's meis. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Loz, Rabbi Shimon, Savi, but treifa ketreifa. It's got the same halacha like treifa, meaning treifa lavavkav the meisai. Even though you're going to die, shchitos metarosa. That means at the end of the day, a treifa is not going to live. And after begin the Torah says if you shecht it, it's okay, like maybe was saying. And therefore, the same thing over here with this 8 months. In the end of the day, the fact that it's not going to live doesn't bother us. You can't compare it to treifa. Why? Treifa is l'shas hakosha. There was a time it could live before it got a hole in the lungs. This could never live. What about an animal which is born with that hole in its lungs? Why is that different? There's no in its species. There's no shchita. Meaning like this. An animal which is born after 8 months can never be shechted. It's always going to be an nevela. Since it's always going to be an nevela, so therefore the halacha is that the shechita doesn't help, and therefore it is tummy. Now, shaking the treifa, there was potential for it to be edible. And even if it was born with a hole in the heart, nevertheless, it's still hole in the lung, it's still considered a possibility of shechita. How is it considered a possibility of shechita? If what person would have done that species, that kind of animal, in another circumstance, it would be possible to be shechted and eaten. The ben shemoina can never be eaten. So let's summarize again. Shum Gamliel came along with a very big chiddush that a baby less than 30 days old, an animal less than 8 days old, you can't be sure that it's alive, and therefore, it is considered and therefore it's considered as if it's not alive, and therefore there's no life to it. Therefore, the was kashaka to besmidas because monav shoch, and that he understands. That's what the Torah is teaching, because the Torah says only do pidin and ben from 30 onwards. Eboilu mi pligi abuna leidam geshum amlereloi. Do the Chachamim actually argue them regarding this? And if they do argue, is the halacha like him or not? Toshema. Egel shnurad beyontav shechnes beyontav. And the calf born on yontav, you can shecht it on yontav. Now, the real chiddush in this Mishnah is that it's not considered a muktzah. Why is it not considered muktzah? Because from erev yontav, a person knows, a person's got a cow about to give birth, he's thinking to himself, you know what? There's a good chance I might eat it, it's not muktzah. But either way, we see that a baby 1 day old can be shechted and eaten. It's before, it's not like a shum gamliel. So we're talking about a kind of animal which you are 100% sure that the animal is going to survive. How? That you know that the animal has gone to full birth. How do you know the animal has gone to full birth? So the Shem explained that when you mated the two animals, you kept them separate afterwards, and there was a 9 months gap from the time of the mating till now. So therefore, you can be sure that it's a viable birth. Says the Gemara, Toshma v'shovin. This is discussing another question. The halacha is the more complicated halacha that a bechor that is born. What's the din of a firstborn animal? What do you do with it? You give it to the kohen. The kohen has to take it to Beis Hamikdash and eat it. Because it's called. Now nowadays we don't have a before Beis Hamikdash, so you have to wait for it to eat the mum and then you eat it. And what happens is, are you allowed to check a mum on Yom Tov? Are you allowed to consider and look into a mum on Yom Tov or not? So the shaila, main reason the Shem say it's no good because it's mesakin. But very good, do mesakin mother, because by establishing that it's got a mum, you now can eat it. It's definitely making it edible. So if it's considered tikkun, it's machlokes if it's considered tikkun or not. Says the Bryce of the Shavin, the both agree Shem then that's okay. If it's born with a mum, then the basin are allowed to decide that it's got a mum, and then you're allowed to eat it. But the problem is it's only 1 day old. How are you going to be able to eat it? We talk about an animal where you're sure that it's been 9 months. Argue with him, but the halacha is like him. And if for a baby less than 30 days old, unless you know, for example, Shem say, let's say a person had relations with his wife and then kept apart for 9 months, or at least for a month or two, until he knows that she became expecting from that night, then there's no problem of this 30 days. But if he didn't, and he doesn't know when exactly she became expecting, so the halacha is until 30 days 30, you don't know that it's a viable birth.
And for an animal, you wouldn't have to wait 8 days.
No, that is a kosov from the Torah, but he understood that.
What's the help to know when the benchmade or
The Gabi Muktzah, Gabi other things. So the Gemara says like this: Omar Abai, Nofa min gag or Yochli Avi. We said like this. We said now there's a machlokes regarding a birth which we're not sure about. Let's say we're not sure when the baby was born. After 8 months, 9 months, 7 months, we don't know. So then we don't know if it's alive or not. Or regarding a baby, an animal. Let's want an animal better. So we've got machlokes if it's considered live or not. Now the question is like this: what happened to it afterwards that it never reached the 8th day? There's 2 ways it can happen. Either it just suddenly died, just walked a bit for a few days and then died, or it got eaten by a lion or fell off a roof. What's the difference between these 2 cases? They're fundamentally different. In a case where it fell off a roof, let's say, then what happens is you could assume that really it was a viable thing. But what happened was it died through this cause. And therefore, we can argue as to whether it was viable or not. When it walked away and suddenly died, so then that's a bit of a proof that there was something wrong with it. Alternative, this is what the Gemara is discussing now. What happened to it that it never actually got? Because once it gets to the 8th day, you can be sure that it's actually a viable birth, a viable animal. So the question is, what happened to it that it didn't reach the 8th day? It says more like this. Everybody agrees that's a proof backwards that the animal actually was going to live. The halacha is like this, that a man who dies without children, then his wife has to do yibum. What happens if he has a child? The child is a few years old and then dies, and it's the only child. You still don't do yibum. Why? Because at the time of death, there was a child. The fact that later the child died doesn't disturb us. Now, what happens if the child was stillborn? Then the halacha is that there is a chiyuv of yibum, because at the end of the day, there was no living child at the time when he died. Now, over here, we're discussing a case where a baby was born, and then within 30 days got killed by a lion or fell off a roof. So this is the machlokas. Do we say, according to Tanakama, we say, well, that was a live child, therefore there's no yibum. According to Gamliel, we say, no, that is not a live child, and therefore we can't do yibum. Says the Gemara, not from Nagag, everybody agrees it's alive. Says the Gemara, Papa, he went to the grandson of Vidi Barovin. He made them a delicious calf, a calf which was the third, meaning it was the third born. The third born calf is always the tastiest. And he shechted it on the 7th day of the animal's life. He didn't wait for the 8th day. They said to him, had you waited for Nacht, we would have eaten it. Now we're not going to eat it. Why? Because they passed like Rishon Gamliel. Since they passed like Rishon Gamliel, they held that's an animal to the 8th day. You don't know if it's alive or dead. And if it's a dead animal, when you're shechting it, you're shechting in the vela. So you see over here that they won't want to eat it because they'll pass like Rishon Gamliel. Now, if you say that when an animal gets killed by other methods, falling off a roof or by a lion, then that's a proof that it was a viable, because otherwise it only died through a new cause. So then why wouldn't they eat it? What was wrong with this animal? Says, well, no, Elo, you have to take it back. If it died like that, everybody agrees that's a death, because at the end of the day you see there's something wrong with it. So again, everybody agrees that the baby or an animal that died automatically within 30 days of birth, without anything untoward happening to it, is considered a mace. I remember something in Manchester years ago, as a child, I remember I had a baby, and the baby died within a couple of weeks, and it didn't sit shiva. There was no shiva for it. And what happened was, because nothing untoward happened, it didn't fall off the roof or get eaten by a lion, it just died, because there was something wrong with the actual, when it was born. Shane Kane, that everybody agrees. After the days would have. But if it was, if it got killed by another circumstances, that's when the machlokes comes into play. Says the Gemara. The son of Dimi Bar Yosef had a baby, and he died within 30 days. Yosef comes abed. So he sat shiva. So his father said to him, do you fancy some food? In the olden days, even nowadays, there's still a savor. I remember a few times we went to Shiva houses. My mother's younger sister was lifter. I was completely overcome, Mrs. Greenman. The amount of food that people sent in, we've been eating there for years, we won't be able to finish it. And what happened was, that's the Sulah Savor, it's a big mitzvah to send in food. I remember being very, very surprised, because I saw leftover food. I thought it was about Tashchis. I took it home. And so he said, we're not allowed to. So I called Vomi Aaron from Gates because I needed something to get access quickly. I said to him, it's either going in the bin or I take it back. I'll take it back and go in the bin, or we can eat it. And what did he say?
Put in the bin.
Take it back and put it in the bin there, he said. Because it's similar law. What? You shouldn't leave the oven house. Very strange. Allah, very hard to digest. A lot of food to eat.
Put it from there and eating it there.
Yes, but
and even not to give to a goy or someone,
no.
It's even better to put it in the bin.
Put it straight in the bin. How do we call? Oh, so let's get it clear now. What? So much food I know. But that has his simikam chayisol, unbelievable. What?
2 in the morning, Thursday night.
What do you mean?
When I had one, it's 2 in the morning. Wasn't much food.
What do you mean you had one?
No.
Yeah, there wasn't much
2
food.
in the morning.
And there was no time between the Levi was at 2 in the morning.
Oh.
The Levi was 12:30.
Okay, so my
Yeah.
So the father.
Shiva is the same thing.
Yeah.
Not just have rod.
Not just have the whole week. The whole week.
Shiva.
Yeah, you can't take food out. Anyway.
You can't think what you're talking about. It's loads of food. Is that wrong? Yeah?
No, I asked about the whole thing. The Mai says his father said to him, I can see you sitting shiva for a baby died less than 30 days old. I know why. Because he fancied the food. So he said to him, no. I know that he's actually 9 months. How is that possible? And we said that he had relations and kept away for 9 months. So they knew it was 9 months. So Vashi Iklibe, it's exactly the same story. Vashi Iklibe of Kahana, Issa bin Misl, so good to Yomin. He lost the child in 30 days. Chazad Yoskom is Abdulavi. That less than 30 days of considered a life. I know about him that it's within that it's 9 months that it was going to live. So just it was a tragedy. It made specific shloshim omdom miskadjo. Let's get the case clear. A woman lost her husband, and there was only one child, and that child was born. And since the child was born, therefore they said to themselves, "Well, there's a baby. There's no din yibum or chalitza because there's a baby alive." So she went and did kiddushin. She went and did a ma'aser kiddushin with another man. She was allowed to, right? And then what happened was he died. The baby died. So what we're going to do now, because we've got a suffix, could very well be that this baby was never going to live, and therefore she now has to do yibum and chalitza to the other person, but she's done kiddushin, so she can't do yibum. She can do chalitza. And the problem is that midvar bonon, once a woman's done chalitza, she can't marry a kohen. Because since chalitza on some level is similar to a get, in what way? Just like a get separates a man from a woman, chalitza frees a woman from the zikas yavam. She makes him free. She makes her free from the relationship with the yavam. Therefore, midvar bonon, one cannot do a ma'aser kiddushin. It can't marry a kohen. So this woman went and she got married, and that child died. Omar Avinu Mishmei Derava, top of Kuf Lamed Vav on the base. Yeah, the baby was already born before she did Kedushin, but they died after she did Kedushin. That means the baby only died after she did Ma'aser Kedushin. In Meishes Yisrael, he said, if she's married to Yisrael, so Chalitza, let's do Chalitza. Who cares? She'll do Chalitza, and in that way, it will be Choshev Shum Gamliel. That the baby was never alive, and therefore she needs to do Yibum. In Meishes Kohen in Chalitza, she didn't do Chalitza. Why? Because we're going to rely on the Chachamim. That even though the baby died within 30 days, it was a live baby. And therefore, since it was a live baby, there's no din yibum. And therefore, we didn't do chalitza. We don't want it to do chalitza because she'll lose her shidduch. She has to do chalitza because you've got no choice, because we're choshev sh'gamliel. You're right that you're right that what you're saying in the name of Rava was said in the evening. But let's you should know that Rava changed his mind. And Rava permitted her not to do chalitza. And therefore, you're being too machmir. You're permitting her. It's as if you're being matter fat. Just like being matter fat is an issa course. And here, by being matter to stay with a man that she did kedusha with, on the basis of the fact that she had a baby, even though the baby died within 30 days, is such a terrible issa that if you're being matter that, you might as well be matter fat, and he would not retract. And in fact, we pasken that she has to do chalitza. Yes.
The article translates it differently then.
The what?
The baby was left before she had kedushin.
No.
And then it would be that she did kedushin with the Esther. Saying she was no.
I'm not sure why do you want to say like that way around?
No, that's how
okay.
I think.
Okay, I don't know if it makes a loch enough communal or ma'aser.
Because it would make it that she did the Issa by getting kedushin.
Maybe she did by mistake, but she didn't realize. I mean, it was
she did it wrong.
Okay.
You could say that maybe. Even such a case.
Right. Right. What did you want to say, Tali? Did you want to say something? No,
something. The mice, that's halach the mice 7 days.
Yeah. We pass on Shungam Leon. Right. Rabbi Yehuda allows a person to do bismillah on androgynous on Shabbos. Androgynous is somebody that's got both male and female parts. Not for everything is considered a zacha. If you say that if everything is a zacha, then when it comes to Evechin is when a person says Evech somebody on something. Then it depends if it's male or female, how much you have to pay. And the part of the Chukosai. So now, how do we know not? The Tanya says has zacha, the male, the hair is spare, and we exclude the tumtum androgynous. Maybe you should pay like a woman. The word ve'im is spare. Zacha vadai the keva vadois lo tumtum androgynous. You don't have to give by tumtum androgynous, not the male equivalent and not the female equivalent. And the more carries on top of Kuflam and Zayin with Aleph. V'stam sifo Rabbi Yehuda. This price that we just quoted, that the tumtum androgynous don't pay male or female, is a sifo, and the sifo is onto Askanim, and that is Tamis Rabbi Yehuda. And therefore, in our Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda says that you're allowed to do bris milah on a zocher, on a droigenos on Shabbos. So the Gemara says, you might have thought, why are you allowed to do bris milah on droigenos on Shabbos? Because Rabbi Yehuda holds that droigenos is a real male, is a male. Says, well, no, you'd be wrong. Because what's my proof? Because the Sifra, which is Shittas Rabbi Yehuda, says that droigenos, you don't pay like an erech of a ish. So you see that he doesn't have the erech of a ish. He's not a zocher. I'll bring you another proof. Everybody's allowed to mix the ashes of the poa aduma with the water. It doesn't allow by a woman or by a droigenos, because the pasuk says the nosan. It speaks in the male term in Parshas Chukas. So a woman is not allowed, and also the droigenos is not allowed. Why is the droigenos not allowed to come to Rabbi Yehuda? Evidently, he holds that a droigenos could be a female. So therefore, it's a right that it doesn't. If that's the case, go back a kasha. If we hold two rights that Rabbi Yehuda holds that droigenos is not male, one is he doesn't have to pay the erech of a male, and one is he's not allowed to do mixing of the ashes of the paraduma water. So if you've got two rayas that is not a male, so why is he allowed to do bris milah on droigenos on Shabbos? We should deceive him kol zocher. Kol zocher. The word kol is spare, all male, to include androgynous. Now, androgynous is allowed to do bris milah even on Shabbos. We don't pass like that, and we don't do a bris milah on androgynous on Shabbos. Okay, we'll stop here. With a very short amud over here. We did more than that anyway. And we'll tomorrow we'll be finished in the parak. And we'll start in the next parak, hopefully. A little bit ahead, but not that much ahead. But okay, Hatzlacha. Sure. Any questions? Good evening, everybody. Andrew, Ian.
Very good.
Hatzlacha. Weiter Simcha tomorrow. Okay, Hatzlacha.
What daf's today?